Hello, bonjour, and welcome to your new Bonheur Private Wines video. Today we're simply going to talk about a few things that you need to know about oak in wine. You hear people talking about oaked Chardonnay versus unoaked Chardonnay, or a wine that's a little too heavy on the oak flavors, or people referring to oak chips being used for making wine. What does all of that even mean? It's actually pretty simple. So we're going to break things down into small chapters that are easy to understand, as we always do here. This is what you need to know about oak in wine. Let's go. And I'm not going to go into the history of using oak in winemaking here and the different species of oak trees that you can use, French oak versus American oak. We'll leave all of that for future videos that will go even deeper. In short, what you need to know is that they initially started using wood barrels to transport wine as a safer alternative for shipping compared to the amphorae ancient civilizations had been using around the Mediterranean essentially. And they found out that oak actually was also good to positively change the aromas and the taste of wine. So let's go through this. The inside of an oak barrel is what we call toasted. They let up a little fire inside the barrel which toasts the wood. Just like when you're toasting bread or roasting coffee, this transforms the chemical composition of the wood and creates aromatic molecules that are then transferred into the wine during the aging or the maturation in barrel. A wine that sets in contact with oak barrels anything between say 3 months to 2 or 3 years gets some aromas and flavors from the oak into the wine just by soaking the wine into the barrel. Then the main aromas, flavors and smells a wine takes on from oak are notes of vanilla, coconut, toasted hazelnut, caramel, and a bit of wood smoke very often. That's to keep it simple. But these aromas will interact with the natural aromas from the wine itself and form a myriad of other molecules that smell like coffee, cocoa, varied spices, and much else. That's essentially how oak changes the aromas of a wine, but it changes the flavors too, and that's mainly bringing in some tannins. Just like grapes, wood naturally contains some tannins. Those little, well, they're actually quite big antioxidant molecules that feel dry on your palate. But the tannins in oak wood, especially in certain species of oak trees that have a very fine grain of wood, and also because of the toasting process that breaks down the wood tannins, those oak tannins are very small and with a silky texture. You can feel them in particular in oaky white wines where there's not many tannins from the grapes, only from the oak. So unlike grapes that can have big, rough, sometimes aggressive tannins that really dry up your taste buds, oak tannins are smooth. So the small and silky oak tannins in wine will surround the bigger and rougher grape tannins, so the aggressive tannins suddenly become soft and enjoyable to drink. That's how oak changes the flavor of wine and why we use it in wine. And this is the third benefit of maturing wine in contact with oak, especially oak barrels. Oak barrels are built to be, as you know, waterproof, or let's say wine-proof, or bourbon-proof, or whiskey-proof, so they don't leak essentially. But wood has pores that slowly let some oxygen into the wine. That's what we call micro-oxygenation. Very small amounts of oxygen dissolves into the wine through the wood during the aging in oak barrels, and that's at the wineries obviously. If you oxygenate a wine with a lot of air, which is essentially what you do when you pop open your bottle of wine and you pour it into your glass, or when you decant your bottle of wine, you introduce a lot of oxygen that will quickly turn your wine into vinegar within a few days or a week or two at max. That's obviously not what the winery wants to do here. But if you only introduce small progressive amounts of oxygen The tannins, because those are antioxidant, you remember, they will absorb O2 molecules, and by doing so the tannins will become softer and smoother in the texture. So this is this slow absorption of oxygen that mellows and refines the mouthfeel and the texture of a wine, from a rough, aggressive young wine to a smooth and pleasing and refined and sophisticated beverage that we like to buy and drink, that is ready to be enjoyed when you buy the bottle of wine. This is why you read on wine labels or spec sheets, this wine has matured for 18 months in oak barrels, because this has to be a slow progressive process that you can't really speed up. Just like maturing cheese, yes, it has to be slow and long or it won't get you great results, right? Does that make sense? So we've seen how oak brings in aromas plus some silky tannins, and how it helps with smoothing the whole texture of the wines. Barrels are generally the best way to achieve this naturally and progressively, because they're just the right size for the right amount of oxygen to come into your wine and the right amount of infused flavors that go into your wine. The right amount of oak for the right amount of oxygen, that's exactly why they have this size in fact. But barrels are expensive to make, very expensive, because you need decade-old trees from France very often as the base material. You need years of drying the wood outside before you can actually use it. There's the toasting, there's assembling of the barrel, etc, etc. Plus, if you think about it, only half an inch of the oak inside the barrel is actually used to flavor the wine. The rest of it, the rest of the wood, is only there to support the weight of the wine, which is quite considerable. We don't use barrels for shipping anymore, so it's a bit of a giant waste of expensive and rare wood. That's a way of looking at it. So as a winemaker, what you can do to achieve similar results without having to put your wine in an expensive barrel, you can simply soak pieces of toasted oak directly in the wine while it's in a tank. For this you can use either oak chips, which are what the name suggests, little chips of oak that is toasted, or you can use oak staves, which are like flat sticks of toasted oak. You soak those in the wine for a little while, like for making tea, and it allows all the oak goodness to infuse into your wine. Generally, you'll also inject a little bit of oxygen into your tank to mimic the micro-oxygenation effect of the aging in barrel and get the smoothing as well. So is that a bad practice? And it is a very important question. Is it cheating to use oak chips and oak staves to make wine? I'd say yes and no, and I'll give you both perspectives. Yes, perhaps because it gives you the impression that a wine has been made using oak barrels, like an expensive chateau wine made using the old winemaking tradition. It essentially makes the wine taste more expensive than it is. So it can introduce a bit of confusion here, which is understandable, and it allows to make wine that tastes oaky in a matter of weeks instead of months. So in that sense, yes, it can be seen as cheating. But if you look at it the other way around, if it's made skillfully with the right amount of oak and using quality oak as well, it actually allows a winemaker to give you all of the goodness that oak brings and gives to a wine, and that we've talked about here into detail, but for a fraction of the price of aging it into barrel. While a new French oak barrel costs about, say, $1,000 for about 300 bottles of wine, with an affordable bag of chips that'll cost, say, $50, $100, you can improve a lot of wine affordably. So it may sound like cheating, but if winemakers are using quality oak, it's actually simply a good way to make good wine. Because there's a very limited supply of these high-end oak trees in the world. Only a few specific forests in France can grow those century-old trees that work really well. Very specific soil, very specific climate, it's not really scalable. While with barrels, 90% of the wood from these old trees goes to waste just to make pretty barrels. Let's say, with oak alternatives, you can infuse quality French oak into a lot of wine. It's a little like truffles, if you can ever compare. It's not the same thing, but you can either eat the truffle fresh, just slicing it in your salad, which is great, or infuse this truffle flavor into a ton of pâté, for example, and make fantastic pâté. It's not necessarily a wrong thing to do, is it? Of course, oak chips don't give as refined a wine a texture and everything else as proper aging in barrel. Barrel aging is for sure better, but also much more expensive. So it's more for mid-range to high-end wines. For affordable wine, is it better to have a cheap wine without French oak goodness in it at all, or just have your cheap, rough-tasting fermented grape juice? As for everything in wine in particular, or in life maybe, it's a matter of taste and personal preference. But at the end of the day, for me, the most important thing is to know what you're buying and what you're paying for. The whole truffle, are you paying for the whole truffle or just the truffle flavored pate, the oak infused affordable wine, or the more traditional barrel aged wine? And I hope this video helped you understand a little bit better where's the difference. I'll leave it here for today. Thanks for watching. Next week I'll make a Q&A video answering questions from you that you've been sending. So that should be really interesting, and I'm actually very excited about this. So I'm very much looking forward to this. So I will see you soon next week in the wonderful world of wine. See you then. Cheers.